you can only see a very narrow chunk of the electromagnetic spectrum, roughly that chunk that enables you to see by sunlight and to detect ripe fruit and that sort of thing. So it's very evolutionarily determined. And you see things of a certain size quite easily because they're handy, right? So objects manifest themselves to you as things because they have some relationship to your capacity to use them as tools, and that's dependent on your size. You have a certain strength and not a different strength. You have a certain degree of articulation. There's some things you can represent in language. So you have limitations that screen out from your consideration all sorts of things. And that's bad because, for example, before people discovered germs, there was a lot of them zipping about killing people, and the fact that we couldn't see them wasn't such a good thing. But by the same token, we're also not as overwhelmed with complexity as we might be if we could detect everything. And you know, one of the problems with being connected so much is that it's easy to drown in information. And that's rough for information foragers. You can't stay off your damn computer because there's, you know, it opens up your senses far beyond their normal limitations. And so where should you stop? Well, you don't. You know, you're on the damn thing like a pensioner on a slot machine, and for many of the same reasons. So your body also filters out the world for you and provides you with access to some information and not access to others. And then the same thing is the case with your nervous system. And I put the first picture there of this is the central nervous system that controls voluntary movement, for example. I put it there because people like to think that their brain is in their head, but it's a stupid way of thinking about it as far as I'm concerned, because you have an awful lot of neurological tissue distributed through your body. And like your autonomic nervous system, if I remember correctly, which is mostly distributed through your body, has more neurons in it than your central nervous system. And so you aren't a brain in a body. You know, your brain is really distributed through your whole body. And I think the idea that you have a brain in a body is kind of a holdover from the idea that you have a soul in a body. And not that I'm necessarily criticizing that idea, but I think they kind of got grafted onto one another. And so, but the problem with that is that and this is that, so it's the soul body, brain body, mind body dichotomy, which I think is the same dichotomy. And the problem with that is that it's easy to think of thought as something that's abstracted away from the body. And I think that was an Enlightenment idea, you know, that just like the soul shouldn't be contaminated by the demands of the body if you were going to be pure spiritually, so your thought shouldn't be contaminated by your subjectivity and your emotions and your motivations and all of that. Your abstractions should be independent of your subjectivity. And rationality and emotion are construed in that manner as enemies. You know, that the purpose of rationality is to dispense with the irrationality of emotion and motivation. And that's Freud's idea of the properly functioning ego is something like that too, because the id is this place of compulsion and drive, and the ego has to basically suppress that in the service of the superego. There's no idea of integration, really, in Freud. Now, I don't want to be rough on Freud, and I think part of the reason that he thought that way is because the patients he had were precisely those who weren't very well integrated because of their pathological past, and so they didn't know how to get those subsystems up into the overarching game, and so their only alternative was something like suppression or repression. Because if you don't know how to be aggressive in a sophisticated way, you're still going to be aggressive, but you're going to have to inhibit it, control yourself, because you can't just be aggressive around people. It just won't go well for you. So even if you can't do it in a sophisticated way, you're going to repress it, or you're going to get in trouble. Those are the options. So, okay, but if you start thinking about the brain, the nervous system as part of the body, as an inseparable part, well then the function of thinking starts to become something different. It's not so much the objective, abstract representation of the world, which is kind of what you're pursuing if you're a scientist. It's more like It's more like conceptualization of and practice of the proper way of being in the world. And I think that's what you're more interested in anyways. I don't see how you can't be, since you're a living thing and you're overwhelmingly motivated to successfully manifest those actions that a living thing has to manifest in order to continue. And it's complicated. Like, you can boil it down to survival and reproduction. It's a good overarching simplification, but there's nothing simple about survival and reproduction. I mean, all sorts of complex monsters emerge out of that, even simple conceptualization. But it's not unreasonable to assume that one of the things that people generally want to do is to continue living in as pain-free manner as possible. It's something like that, although that's a simplification.